Well, all right, how's everybody doing today? It's Hickey here from HKR, and I just wanted to do a little bit on this. We're done the hood. The hood's nice. It's going to be sanded and primed. We got the fender completed. It's ready to sand and prime. So we're going to do like a little bit of a, when I sand it, all this primer that you see, most of that'll be long gone. This is probably good enough to paint over, but we don't want to paint over it. And I mean, you can to some degree. I'll show you what I'm using. This stuff right here, it's pretty decent. You can use it if you're sanding and you break through a little bit, you spray a bit of that on. As long as you wait 10 minutes, you can top coat right over it. Which is great if you make a little mistake and you don't want to mix up a whole bunch of stuff. But what we're doing in this case, there's barely anything on. The only reason I'm using it is if you put a little thin coat and then you go over it a little slow, you can kind of go down the side of the car and you can really see the shine. Now this stuff won't react with stuff. Some of them do. Excuse me. But if you do like a cheap primer, especially all that lacquer-based stuff, I'm not a huge fan. Now, I know some people say, well, the etching isn't compatible with the filler and other stuff and what have you, but I actually called the company that makes that stuff to say, look, this seems to be working for me. I've had a few people say don't do it. Now, what you don't want to do is put a bunch of that on and put primer or Bondo over it. You can't do that. Bondo's got to go on bare metal that's been properly sanded, right, so that it sticks, which is what it's meant for. Now, it doesn't mean you can't put it over top of properly, like if you prep your epoxy primer really well, you can go over that too. Excuse me. I had a bit of a cold for a few days and my throat is all hacked up, even though I'm feeling better now. But anyway, we got the hood done. We're in the final stages. We got this fender done. Really happy with that. This door is beautiful. This lighter color is an epoxy primer. So you can see where I only had to do a little bit of work, leveled all these out. So what we're going to do now is put a little bit of, when we're done sanding, pretty much the whole car, maybe not the whole car, but most of the car is going to have a coat of epoxy primer. We're going to go a little heavier on the roof quarters and trunk lid because that's where there was so much trauma. We don't want to have any surprise sand swirl or anything. I'm going to use the CRE321, which is a epoxy primer, but it's also a sandable high build, and I really like it. It smooths out nice by hand. It blocks fairly well. You do eat a bit of paper, but so what? As we were going on this fender, this spot here, I think I had in a video the other day, it was kind of bad, but I believe we're good now. And when I throw that primer on and it's wet, it's like smooth, smooth, smooth. So everything is going to line up really nice. Now I went down this gap and I rounded the edges before I primed it, which is nice. Now when I sand this all down, I'll catch all that again. This primer is not to hold anything on the car in this case, but because it shines real high and I don't want a bunch of lacquer junk in this, I use it basically so I can see how straight things are, right? Now you can always, I've seen where guys have like, oh, paint it black and then just sand it all off or whatever. Yeah, no, the primer, I mean, if you don't get all of it off and some of it's in there, it's going to be fine. It does have an etching agent in it, but it's pretty low, so it's not enough that it's going to hurt anything as long as you let it dry for 10 minutes or more. And it's safe over filler. It says so right on the can. I did call the company to make sure that was the thing. So what I had here, right in the middle here, those two other spots. Now, it looks like I put a whole bunch of filler on the quarter. It's a little bit fatter than a skim coat, but I had 4 spots that every time I sanded it, the metal would come through quick. So what I did is I sanded it a little bit more than I should have on purpose, and I just slightly tapped those high spots in a wee bit. Now, you don't want to dolly behind that when you do it because you're going to flatten and stretch the metal. You're going to have to tin can it in to get it, and we didn't want to do that. We just wanted to massage them in a bit. So there's a couple ways of doing that. You can take what they call a slapper, and let's say the spot right here wasn't primer. Like this is nice and smooth now, but if this was a high spot of metal, You basically just take your slapper, make sure it's sitting there, you put your finger to the end, and you hit it and stop. Like, you don't want it to bounce, and if you kind of, you know, tap it in, it'll slowly work its way in. Check it with a file, put some guide coat and hit it with your board real quick, whatever you want to do, but make sure it goes in. The other thing you can do, and some guys say it doesn't work, but it's always worked for me. I use this one. It has a fairly sharp pick on it, but if you look at the tip, it is dull. And I'll come in like this and knock a few spots, and you gotta set your light up, kind of the way the paintless dent repair guys do. And you can kind of tap it and watch the areas, and you can watch it sink in. The rest of the panel doesn't even move. Nothing's behind it. I've had good luck with that. And I mean, I'm talking, these high spots were teeny tiny high spots. They were barely there. Maybe the primer would take them, but the last thing I want on this car, because I've gone through this car so much, it's going to be so smooth. If you have this one little welt, people are going to say, oh, the Bondo's coming out or something's happening, and it's going to suck. So let's not suck, right? Then, of course, I did have a few places I hadn't bothered doing. We're here. There was some air bubbles. You can see down there a couple spots. Same sort of thing. In front of the tire there, I kind of lost the body line just a touch. So I had to put a little more in here. And now we'll block it all at the same time. I could have blocked it, but I was worried I'd take too much of the line out. So you got to have enough meat. Pardon my voice again. It's healing up from some weird head cold that's been going around. Anyway, so this is going to be blocked till there will be almost none left, because we know the car was super smooth. I used flexible straight edges, ran it up and down, back and forth. The arch seems to be the same. It's all been blocked together. So it was just those high spots, just to make sure. But when I block this down again, that should be perfect. Very hot and humid lately, and I'm noticing the heat usually dries this stuff quick. But it's so humid that I'm finding things are drying slow. So what else do we got? Still haven't gone over this fender completely, but we're going to do that soon. Started working on that a little bit. A little bit to do down here. This was like some little pinholes and marks, a little sand swirl in here. So like this is like barely filler. You can probably hit that with like the 220 on a block. And prime that as well. There's a tiny little spot right there, kind of right here. Trunk lid, most of that's done, some of it has to be done. So what I'm going to do now is finish this side, throw a bit of primer to make sure it's straight, probably finish those guys. I'll go block out the other quarter panel. And then it'll be time to lower the car back down, because I'm going to have to move to the other side of the shop. And once we have the car down, I'll do the trunk lid. We're also going to go a little haywire on the roof and put a couple fat coats on the roof. Excuse me. There won't be any Bondo on the roof at all. Just 2 fat coats of primer, and then we'll block that down so everything is nice. Give me just a second. Oh. All right, my camera kind of sucks. But I know we need sharp paper, and we talk about different things. Let me see if I can get this. Excuse me again. Oh my goodness. It's almost like a sneeze. But okay. So I just wanted to explain something while I was working on this. This is just my regular Durablock. I don't need a super long one. You kind of want to float it on the new filler you put on, and not drag sand swirl in the whole car, right? This paper is getting a little bit plugged and dull, but not bad. But the edges are sharp, the middle's not. Now, normally I'd say put a nice sharp piece of paper on, but because the edges are good, I want the car to blend, and I want it to be flat, but I also want to blend it out, right? So if I run this like so, and I put a little more pressure here, and I let the back float, the middle where it's dull is going to kind of miss. I don't need to necessarily block it all together. So I'm going to use the sharp spot, let the dull, there's sharp here as well, but that'll kind of float away from the car, because the whole car is a little bit round. So this way I'm not scratching the hell out of this, I'm not scratching the hell out of this, because this car is really, really close. Now, what I'm doing probably takes a lot of experience. It's something I couldn't have done when I was younger. But whatever you do, I mean, and here's the thing with all these cars. If you're building it for yourself especially, and you're not taking it to a shop and getting everything farmed out, a nice thing you can do, know that if you do over sand it and it goes bad, kind of like those little high spots I had back there, and that was the first fender I did and I thought it was perfect, but I've taken this car to such a level of flatness and straightness that wasn't good enough for me anymore. Now, it doesn't mean you have to make everything perfect, but what I'm trying to say is, if I over sand this and wreck this, I can always put more filler on and do it again. Same as with the metal, you can cut and weld, and if something's off, if you got to cut and weld it, take the time to cut and weld it again, right? So, I'm just kind of coming off the edge, because I noticed when I sanded and blocked from this side, there was a bit of a high spot. And as you can see, this is so thin that it takes almost nothing. Just checking my sharpness across. Now that that edge is gone here, I can go across. There's a little bit down here. And I mean, I'm barely putting weight on this. And you always want to go crisscross no matter what you do. I do have a machine I can run on this, but we're at a stage where it is so fine that we don't need to do that anymore. Now this is 80 and it's fairly sharp stuff. This is 180 and it's a little bit dull. If you look up here, I wonder if you can see that. I think you can, but there's a little bit of sand scratching. So after I get that out, so these aren't like high spots. There was some cuts here from sanding. They're all filled now, right? And it's smooth, like it feels almost like glass. There we go. Right, so I'm kind of really taking my time and babying it a little bit, which it's, when you're in the beginning, and on this spot I wasn't too bad, but if you're new at this, I'd recommend maybe go this wide, put a little bit on, let it harden, but don't let it harden for days, because then it's a little harder to sand. Now I do sometimes, but I mean, I've been doing it long enough, I kind of know what to do when it's super hard and whatnot. But if you let it harden just, an hour or whatever it is, and then you do it, because it's not all the way cured, it does sand a little better. Better quality stuff seems to work better. You get what you pay for to some degree. And if you want, maybe I'll grab my camera when we're done here and I'll show you what I'm using. But this is really, really nice here. I got a little bit extra here because I didn't sand right into the door yet, but once I get this flooded, I'm literally going to put a new paper and go all the way across, and then I'm going to prime it, and then I'm going to machine it across. Like it's going to be pretty straight. And the reason I'm going over 2, it's because that's the only way you're going to get it down there. There's no amount of moving fenders in and out, and I'm pretty good at gap and moving panels and adjusting stuff, but when you do it this way, it's going to be easier to find that spot, because that spot's going to be true and all the same. Those super crazy woodworkers out there would know what I'm talking about. That's that little bit of the spot I missed. Don't worry about what you can see. That doesn't mean it's high. It just means it wasn't quite right, which is why we filled it again to begin with. Right? This is flat, flat, flat. I mean, the little bit of orange peel that's in that, whatever that red primer was, like, look, it's going to take that down like glass. Now, we don't have to deal with that yet because we're going to sand the whole car still, right? But even though this looks like you can see something here, oh yeah, you definitely can. That's all the imperfections that we just filled, and a lot of that was caused by the sand scratching and unevenness, and it's a lot of trauma. So As in you're doing trauma to the car with all the scratching and the whatnot. I'm asking a little bit much of these. They're a little bit on the soft side. Yeah, there's a little bit. It's not quite taking it down. We're going to replace that. This one's still alright. The 80 grit is still alright. We're going to come in here later and I'll use a round block to get this edge nice. And I'll also get it nice this way. Yeah, there's quite a bit more right here that's got to come out. If you're a mechanic and you like everything done fast, you're going to hate Bodywork. So if you're a tinkerer, buy some with a good body, do all the mechanical stuff. And if you're like me and you hate getting your hands greasy, I don't really mind the dust. So Bodywork for me, that's just what I like to do. And I can do the mechanical on the older stuff, but I never wanted to be no mechanic. See, I'm letting the dull kind of float up off the fender and concentrate more here. There's longer blocks for longer areas. I suppose we could probably do a bit of that right here. I'm in a bit of an awkward spot because I don't want to block the camera. Now, because I'm talking on camera and my voice isn't 100%, sometimes I yell through a mask. This is all falling right to the floor. I gotta say, this stuff is pretty good for that. But as soon as you spin it with a sander, yeah, it's all over the place. So, you know, I'd say 95% of the time wear your mask. You should probably wear it all the time, but it's hard to explain and talk when you're not, right? So, or when you are wearing a mask. Now you can see where the gray, I'm using two different hardeners, a red and a gray. And if you look down here, let me see if I can bring that in better. I wonder, sweet. So if you look right at the tip here, you can see that little bit of red and then gray on the edge. That's where the one filler filled up the low spot. That's why you see two colors. Now you can kind of use that as a bit of a guide, and all you do is get red hardener and blue hardener. And I mean, if you don't put too much in, it won't make so much color that it won't bleed through. Now, everything here is going to have a couple coats of epoxy primer and be blocked. Ain't nothing coming through, right? Now, if you're doing a white paint job and you're only going to do a little bit on a car, like say you're fixing up a door and a fender on an older restoration, but the car is still really nice, maybe it got rubbed or scratched. On a white car, don't use the red. Because if you just use a little bit of cheapy primer and then paint the car white, it's rare, but it can suck up a little bit of that red hardener, especially if you run it heavy. But if you run it to where it's just barely pink and you prime it properly, you should be okay. But think about the color a vehicle's going to be. And realistically, you can use things to suit. Now, when I got this car, it was full of red, it was full of blue, it was full of white and gray and whatever this green primer crap is. So this car, like I say, we're going to have to seal the whole thing off. And if you're not doing that, because maybe you're doing a little bit of spray bomb work and you're going to paint your car at home, just, you know, think lighter colors. Maybe go to the blue hardener. When you sand it, it all eventually goes white. And don't use too much hardener. I'm seeing right here I have this drag mark in it. There's all pinholes. And here as well. That doesn't want to quite block down. I'm going to give it a little more and see what happens. But if this don't come out, I might have to put a skim coat here. Now I'm talking a little blot and flatten her out. I'm putting a little pressure, but not a whole lot, like just enough to keep it on the car. And never do this, you'll want to, but then you can create these, right? So always this way and that way, like a crisscross. Yeah, right in here we're going to need a little more filler. Maybe a little bit right here before I sand that out. A little bit on the edge of the door. That can be sanded out later. So you got to know when to stop. Now, if you become uber paranoid and you're not sure, there's a few tricks to that. Different people do different things. One trick I like, and I mean, you can't only go by this trick. Where did that go? Way too much going on these last few days. But what I like to do is I like to take a steel ruler. Oh, look at that. It was right beside us on the floor here. I was using it to measure. So in '68, they had these plastic things that lock the trim into here. In '69, it would seem some cars, not all of them, had twin holes. We're using this style of hardware, so all these holes will have to be plugged. You can see that center line, so I basically put the piece on, marked it, found the center, and drilled out all the holes. That way when it's painted, you're not drilling it, because you want that all to be hit with the primer. So I'm going to try to show you this, if I can. Guide code is always the best way. You're not going to trust it when you're a noob. Now, you shouldn't have to push this to where you're making it fit. If you simply gently hold it on the car, and you push pressure in and out, it should conform to the car 100%. Like if I do this, it seems to want to go right into the car, and it all kind of tracks. Now you can also do this right on a round, and you can rock it, and you shouldn't have what they call flat spots. Now you will have spots where the car is out and then it goes in. You shouldn't have that on a lot of cars, but some cars have that. So the back fenders on this car, the middle pops out, the back does. It's all what they call convexed. But then if you look right in front of the door, or right behind the door, that's concaved, right? So there's a great big gap behind it. When you come back here, this should have a wee bit of rock like this. And you can look at the ends. This is a 2-foot ruler. If you look at the ends, you can kind of see how much it rocks. You put it up here, that gap you create on the end, like at this end, when you rock it, when one side hits, that gap should be more or less the same. And if it changes, as long as it's real nice and gradual, because you want the car to be smooth. And I mean, I'm probably going a little bit beyond where anyone needs to go. Maybe that's just how my brain works. If you look down the car, the back 6, 8, 10 inches of the door goes straight, and then it concaves and then comes out, and then it goes convex back in at the front. So just be aware that your door that looks flat may not be flat. Like if I put this here, there's a high spot here almost where it's convexed. Then it kind of goes to a flat. Not quite, like I can rock it, but we're talking a millimeter at each end. When I come way back to here, don't know if I'm explaining this right. When I come back to here, there's not quite 1/8 of an inch gap here where the door kind of flows, and then it continues into the fender, right? So the idea was, I don't know, a lot of guys call it the Coke bottle effect. You know, a little bit of an ass, a little bit of a waist, you know, a little bit of a torso. Trying to keep it PG, but you get the idea. I mean, it ain't a shapely Corvette, but the reason a lot of us like these cars is simply because they have shape, but they're smooth. And even though these particular cars, in the case of these B bodies, and the Chargers, right? Think about the Chargers. So when you look down a B body, especially 68, 69, you got that nice little rib. And even though this car is pretty straight, other than those two ribs and the fenders, the car has a little bit of hourglass shape to it. Now, when you think of the Dodge Charger, there's almost no shape or body line to it at all, but it has a nice subtle hourglass shape, and it's just pleasing to look at. So you're looking at it going, wow, I like that. You don't necessarily know why, but for some reason, if the fenders seem to pop out where the tires go, it just creates a shape that we all seem to like. And all the iconic cars we like have that look. You know, and some people like the wide bodies because you can push that look out a little more. Some guys hate them because they've seen where people have put fender flares and stuff, and you put too much on and you lose that shape. And I mean, let's face it, I know a lot of cars, and I'm not a purist. I'm a big customized type of guy. I like everything custom. The lead sled area, I'd love to live in that. But this car is so nice, it's like I don't want to change much. It's a nice car. You know, good body style, cool hood. It's got humps on it with like little fake mini vents, but they look cool, you know. It's not too much. It's not like a 7-inch, 8-inch cowl hood, you know, or anything like that. But anyway, I just wanted to show you a little bit of blocking. Don't be afraid of it if you go too far. And I don't know if I went too far on this or if I didn't have enough meat on it to begin with, but I had 4 spots I wasn't happy with. I kind of went around them gently and blocked them in, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to end up creating a mess that I can't see, and later I can see it. Ran my ruler on it. Those high spots, like what I showed you on the other side, when I ran my ruler on it, I immediately saw where I wasn't sure. I was positive 2 out of those 4 spots weren't where they should be, so I kind of knocked all 4 of them in just to make sure and flooded it again. I mean, what's another hour on a car that's taken hundreds of hours? So that's just the reality, right? Or I don't even know how many hours. This is a little bit of a different car that I'm doing, and I'm not really paying attention to some of that. Excuse me. But anyway, that's where we're at. I'm going to go ahead and finish this up. Next time I do a video on this, if we're lucky, it'll be half primered. And yeah, I'll show you how that CRE 321 works when you block it out. Thanks for watching. Cheers.